Strange lights are seen flickering in the clouds. A huge shape gradually descends down towards the city, and 5 notes boom out across the sky. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth, the Mothership has landed. Greetings, people of Earth. I'm Rob Hoyton. Thanks very much for joining me today. Welcome to Dragon's Teeth, and welcome to this new playlist as well. As you may know, I'm planning on running a Mothership campaign next year, so I thought what I'd do is set up a new playlist, and we'll be putting all the Mothership content here. Today we're looking at the core rule set. We'll be looking at the setting, how we're going to run the campaign, rules tweaks we're going to make, and of course hopefully as we go along we'll get some actual gameplay in as well. So if you'd like to keep up to date with all of that and everything else we have here going on at Dragon's Teeth, then please do click the subscribe button below. So I've been wanting to get back in GMing a game for a while. I'm a player in 2 campaigns at the moment: Cult, the modern horror game, and Rolemaster, the classic fantasy game. But I wanted to get back into running something horror related, and I was hearing a lot of good things about Mothership, which of course is a sci-fi horror game. I managed to play a session at Concrete Cow a couple of months back, enjoyed that so much I thought, yep, this is the game for me. So as you can see, I've purchased the core set. What I'm going to do today is take you through what's in here and also the basics of the game system. I'm not going to go too in depth for a couple of reasons really. One, I've just had a quick read through of this, so it's all very new and fresh. But 2, I want to dig more into the actual system when I talk about the setting and how I'm going to run the campaign, because I think there's going to be a few tweaks made as we go along. So there's 3 things that attracted me there. 1, the system itself is very straightforward and very simple. At the moment, playing Cult and Rolemaster, I've got sort of 2 ends of the spectrum, and the 2 work quite differently. Rolemaster, perhaps it should be R-O-L-L, you roll in a lot. With Cult, if we get into, say, a fight scene or combat situation, generally you'll just make 1 roll at the start of that scene, and that will determine the course of events throughout. Mothership is very much at that Cult end of the spectrum. As you'll see when we start going through, there's not many stats to run. I think I've seen in a couple of places you can create a character in sort of 10 minutes pretty much. But we'll get into that as we go along. The second thing that attracted me was the concept, because let's face it, outer space is very, very scary. I think it's bad enough being underwater, but at least if you're underwater, you think, right, I've just got to go up and I'll get back to the surface, hopefully. If you're in the far reaches of outer space, you're surrounded by nothing. Most of space is just an empty void. And this appeals to the Lovecraft fan in me, because of course what Lovecraft, well, invented or certainly refined was this idea of cosmic horror. We are just mere insignificant specks in a vast, uncaring universe. And of course with Lovecraftian horror, you have this scale as well. You can go from pulp Cthulhu, you know, having fights with deep ones and all that sort of thing, all the way through Lovecraft, and you come out the other end, Thomas Ligotti, which is extremely, extremely bleak. A very exceptional and powerful writer, I think, but you only want to read 1 or 2 stories at a time. So space as a setting makes perfect sense for both that cosmic horror, but also incorporates body horror. We've got psychological horror. It just seems a natural setting for a horror game. And the third and final attraction was this idea that in Mothership, they don't give you a setting. Now, there's a ton of support for the game. As we'll see, there's a lot of stuff in the rules. I'm amazed at the amount of information that they pack in. And if you watch my review on A Pound of Flesh, which is the space station campaign setting for Mothership, you'll see just how much information they managed to pack into these quite small booklets. But there is no overarching setting, so it isn't a world that you have to learn. You don't have to know about this history and that corporation and everything else. These are all things you can add into the game yourself to whatever depth you want, I guess. Now, I will be going into detail on the setting next time because, as I mentioned before on that review, I am going to be using my own setting, which is taken from my Assault Team 5 range of military sci-fi novels, which means I've got to go back and read them and maybe write another one as well, just to just to refresh my memory on the actual setup I had there. So I'll talk about that in detail in the next video. So we have a compact but rather weighty box, it has to be said. Dare we open it and take a look inside? There's our box then, and this is all A5 size, as most of the scenarios and supplements that I've seen are as well. And quite a weighty box. There's a list of our contents on the back. And if we open it, the first thing we see, we've got a bag of dice there. We've got some stands for the card figures that come with the game. We've got a GM screen. How does this open? There's the first puzzle. How do you open the GM screen? Ah, there we go. So, as you'd expect, we've got all the charts and tables we need there as a GM to run the game. And the other side is a rather interesting, very typical Mothership design. I guess the aesthetic is similar to Morkborg in some ways. And as I mentioned in my review of A Pound of Flesh, I do like this zine approach. Having been someone who put out a zine in his younger years. We then get this map. So one side of that relates to ship-to-ship combat, the ranges for ship-to-ship combat. Well, not just combat, but also navigation as well. Because, of course, space is very, very big, and it can take a while to get around. So that's very useful for your ship-to-ship combat. And on the other side, we have this nice set of deck plans for the BAS Lehman, which is a jump liner, I believe. That's like a passenger ship, I guess you'd call it. Next up, we have those card characters I mentioned. So just to give you some idea of the dangers of space, you can see there player characters, and you can see there the typical sort of bug you might encounter. Notice the disparity in size. Just saying. So they're very useful if you want to use figures but you haven't got any. There's enough there for you to use. A couple of ship ones as well. I guess they will go on that map for your ship combat. So now we come to the core of the game with the player's survival guide. So let's take a look through that. And we start with the table for weapons and damage and armor stats as well. And as you can see, as I mentioned about the layout of these, they pack a lot of information. There's no wasted space. Straight away inside cover, we've got information. We've got a content warning there, which of course you're going to need for, well, any RPG I would say these days, but particularly one that's dealing with horror. And we're straight into how to make your character. So, as I say, you only have a handful of stats really. Strength, speed, intellect and combat. And underneath those you have sanity, fear and body. Those are for saves. Strength, speed, intellect and combat, all pretty self-explanatory. To generate those you roll 2d10, add them together, then add 25. And for your saves, you also roll 2d10, but you add 10 for those. There's a choice of 4 character classes. Now that is something I'm going to be looking at because I've seen a lot of additional character classes in some of the supplements and scenarios. But the 4 basic ones here are Marine, Android, Scientist and Teamster. And when you choose one of those, as you might expect, you'll get some relevant skills as well. You'll be given some automatically. So of course, if you're a Marine, you're going to have military training, and it tells you what other skills you can choose as well, or the number of skills. So you can choose 1 expert skill, or 2 trained skills. So that's pretty much it for your character generation. You roll up your health as well. Now the health is 10 plus 1d10, I believe. So that doesn't seem very much. When you see here, we've got a health of 13. And if we go back to, well, look, even a humble boarding axe is doing 2d10 of damage. This is a game where combat is quite deadly. Now, the interesting thing with this system and the way that it works is dice rolls, or skill checks in particular, and saves are only made in stressful circumstances. If, for example, you've got a sort of computer skill and it's a run-of-the-mill task, you're trying to find some information on the computer, that sort of thing, you don't need to roll the dice. So this is in contrast to some of those other systems I mentioned. I mean, even Call of Cthulhu to some extent. On there, you've got quite a lot of skills. If you're looking for something in the library, you roll your library research, that kind of thing. This, it seems to me, is more a game where you only make the dice roll if you're under pressure, which in a way makes a lot of sense. And it also, I think, simplifies the skill tree. Now, of course, I'm sure we can add in other skills to this. I'm sure we will be doing that as well. But essentially, that's the system. You're only rolling your skill when you're trying to work it under some sort of pressure or duress. You will also notice here as well that you have your health points and wounds. I think when you get down to 0 health point, you take a wound, and there's a table later on that will tell you what sort of wound you get. So it's not like you're down to 0 and you die. Down to 0 and you take a wound. Having said that, you can only generally take a couple of wounds. So I suppose in a sense we shouldn't think of that as hit points, or if we do, because we can take 2 wounds, we should think of that as 26 hit points. Still, seems like combat is something to be avoided. Now you will notice another number here that says stress, 2. You start with 2 stress points. I'm sure we all know what stress is, don't need to explain anything about that, I'm sure. You keep track of this number because it becomes very important. So if we go to this section on stress, we see how that works. Basically, if you fail a stat check or a save, you gain 1 point of stress. Also, certain locations or entities can automatically give you stress from interacting with or witnessing them. The maximum stress you can have is 20. So what might happen in certain situations is you have to take a panic check. You roll the panic die, a d20, and you have to roll greater than your current stress. So if your stress level is at 4, you've got to roll over 4 on the d20 in order not to panic. Obviously, as the stress level increases, so does the likelihood of a panic attack. If you do fail the panic check, then there's another chart here to tell you what might happen. That ranges from adrenaline rush and being nervous and jumpy all the way through to having a heart attack, or if you're an android, short-circuiting. So quite a range of potential effects there. I guess this in one sense is a version of the sanity roll in Call of Cthulhu. Obviously in any horror game you've got to have some sort of mechanic built in that deals with the psychological effect of what the players are witnessing and experiencing. So that's basically it for your character creation. Of course you name the character as well. And I guess this is for one-shots, that's where you'd finish. Well, I say that's where you'd finish. For one-shots, you'd also go into your loadouts as well. This is where you equip your character. For a campaign setting, it's going to be a little different. You're going to be building up much more of a background for your character. There's a certain process by which they join the campaign, of course. But I can see how if you were running a one-shot or you're just setting up a game on the quick, that for character creation, I reckon 10-15 minutes and you are done. Then there's a list of equipment that ranges from assorted tools through to oxygen tanks, salvage drones, water filtration devices, basically all the stuff you're going to need if you're stomping around deserted spaceships. And of course, hardware. This is nice because we get a mix of firearms, So, you know, your smart rifle, combat shotgun, all that sort of thing. But industrial equipment as well. Laser cutter, nail gun, marvellous. And as you can see again here, look, your laser cutter does 1d100 damage. So yeah, you really don't want to get into firefights in this game, it seems. And here again is a nice example of how space is used with this kind of design and layout. There's just a picture of each type of armour and basically what it does and what it gives you. So some gives you armour points, you might get an oxygen supply, radiation shielding and so on. Very neat and efficient way of presenting that information, I think. Some advice on setting up your game, safety instructions, how to be a good player. And then you're into how the game actually runs, your stat checks, your saves, how they are modified. So for example, if you are making a stat check, if you have a trained skill in that particular task that you're trying to do, you get +10, expert skill gives you +15, master skill gives you +20. So a very quick and simple way of, if you like, putting in skill levels without getting into levels of character and all that kind of stuff as well. Of course, you can train up in skills. That generally takes time or money, or both. Then we get into the combat, how combat works. There's a couple of variations here. You can basically let everyone roll the dice at the same time pretty much, or you can get into turn order where characters will have to make some sort of stat check to see who goes first. A little bit more about our combat and wounds. Range and distance. Again, a nice picture there that just illustrates everything from adjacent out to extreme range and what will work at what range. Then we're into the basics of survival. So yes, space is a dangerous place, right? If you're in outer space, of course, you've got to think about atmosphere and oxygen and radiation. But even if you're not in space, you're on a hostile planet, say, you've got to think about food and water, the effect of temperature and all those sort of things as well. It feels a bit like everything's out to get you, doesn't it? Medical care with a nice alien-esque picture there. Well, I say nice, it's not at all nice, it's horrible. And then we get some play examples. And just to finish off, to help fill out the background, we get some classifications of the various types of ports and space stations. Shore leave, this is where of course you can lower your stress again. And then we get some stats for NPCs, so you might want to add these into the party of course, or they could be contractors you hire or other people you just meet. And there's a copy of our character sheet again and the skills. And on the back, just a very neat summing up of how to play the game. And that is pretty much it, all in there. I mean, obviously you need to read through a little bit, but once you've read through a couple of times, you know, there's all your references really. That plus the tables on the Warden screen is all you need to know. And here is the Warden's operation manual that gets very highly recommended in reviews. And basically it's a guide on how to prepare a session, but takes you further than that. You get into, for example, the different types of horror and what you might have to do. And I like this idea of it gives you 3 S's: survive, solve and save. Really, that in itself gives you an outline for a scenario, but then you also get this idea of acts as well. This is called the Tombs cycle: transgression, omens, manifestation, banishment and slumber. This is a way to plot out your scenario if you're writing your own, or even you see how it's applied in printed scenarios. And I think this is very good for giving you a good guideline to how you pace your game as well, because obviously you want certain moments for research or looking for stuff or exploration, and other moments like manifestation where the tempo really ups and the pressure really increases as well. Tips on survival, tactical considerations, and then very good advice here on giving the player something to solve. How do you create interesting puzzles? because as well as a horror game, this is an investigative game as well, much like Call of Cthulhu. And one difficult thing, especially if you're coming into it new, can be how do you create an interesting puzzle or an interesting plot? So lots of good advice there as well. How to create useful NPCs, someone to save, as it is titled there. How to draw your maps. Now this is quite different from your dungeon type stuff, in that the maps tend to be, what would you say, they're representational. They're not like, you know, 10-foot corridor and then a 30-foot room. It's more like almost a flow chart. So if you go in this one, then you're going from here to here to here, and it just lists pretty much what everyone is. So that's why when it comes to scenarios, they can pack a scenario into quite a short space, because you haven't got pages and pages of maps and descriptions of what a kitchen is like, for example. If you're in a spaceport and you go into a kitchen, everyone knows what a kitchen looks like. You don't necessarily need 3 paragraphs describing the kitchen. Of course, you want some information on what might be lurking in the kitchen, but that's something else. How to run your first session. So very good for newcomers to the hobby. And then that advice on safety instructions. Very important, particularly in a horror RPG, but even in any RPG, a fantasy or whatever, we need to know what the boundaries are for each player. You know, the game needs to be fun and enjoyable. And if there are things that are going to upset people or step over certain boundaries, then those need to be sorted out before you start playing. How the game works. And again, this is all advice that you can apply to any system. Being impartial, taking good notes, how to describe the situation, and so on. And this is nice to see as well, making up house rules. Because as they say, and I say in anything I put out as well, it's up to you to make it your game as well. So if you want to change things, change them. If that makes it work for your game or your campaign, then you should feel free to change anything. And then we get a bit more into, I suppose, of what you call the social background in the game, because of course there are social encounters, there are violent encounters, how to run investigations, and then on to spaceships as well. Space is dangerous, in case you hadn't worked that out already, and ships are expensive. So this is not a game where you're hurtling around the universe in a sort of Federation cruiser, fully armed with photon torpedoes and 20 phasers. No, you're more likely in a bit of a tin can that might have a Gatling cannon at the front, and that's pretty much it. And then advice on how to build a campaign, some ideas for entry points for your players, and then if you like the geography of the universe, and again a very sort of basic map, but one that has all the information on it, how to map your own clusters and star systems and everything else. Of course, the thing with the sci-fi setting is you're potentially travelling vast distances, so you have to have invented something like a warp drive or jump gates. Otherwise everyone's in cryo, or they're sitting there for 6 months waiting to get to another planet. Finally, how to create different factions and companies within the game, and also a chapter there on pay and salary, because money is a thing, of course, even in the future. Well, that is something that I'm potentially going to change in my campaign, but we'll get to that. Then this lovely chart here on all these types of survival that we mentioned a little bit already. Survival, psychological, slasher, creature feature, paranormal, technological and body horror. And these, of course, will all flow into other various types. So if we look at our psychological, then it's nice to see we've got our cosmic horror on there. That can relate to creature horror, because we could have an alien. Survival could be a natural disaster, or even just space travel on its own. You know, imagine the horror of being on a ship where the life support system is failing. So there's not a lot of action going on, but there's a huge amount of psychological tension there. And finally, some advice on telling a good story, how to build your narration and how to work that into your campaign. And we finish with some more random charts for developing planets, factions, settlements, and all the rest of it as well. Nice little bit on the back here, terms of use. There is no official way to play. treat every monster like it's a boss monster, which I suspect they pretty much are. Survive, solve or save, pick 2. So just some nice little tips on the back there as well. And then just quickly through the last few books in here, this is the Shipbreaker's Toolkit. This basically gives you all the details you need to construct your own ships, whether they be jump liners, whether they be corvettes. They're basically sort of patrol craft, military patrol craft, salvage cutters, smaller patrol craft, freighters. So yeah, all the information you need for the party to either buy or hire or steal or whatever the type of ship that they're going to need. And there's going to be certain adventures, I'm sure, that are set on either abandoned ships or ships in distress. And of course there's a section on ship-to-ship combat, which looks to be as pretty much as deadly as your person-to-person. And you're on a spaceship floating out in space. What can go wrong? Well, there you go. There's about 100 things that could go wrong. You know, in case the tension levels aren't high enough, you could have overloaded circuitry, cracked viewports, no emergency power, or perhaps a fuel leak. That sounds like fun. And there, in effect, is a character sheet for your ship as well. The Unconfirmed Contact Reports booklet. This is essentially a monster manual. Lots of nice artwork in here and lots of ideas for... I was pleased to see sort of different types of monsters. I mean, space, everyone thinks like alien, that type of stuff. So yeah, you have got that type of creature. But there are some things that are a lot more ethereal or ghost-like or just plain nasty. And again, this is presented almost like a... You know, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It gives you a nice little description and tells you exactly what they might do to a person and where they're seen and the sort of situations you might encounter one of these creatures in. Finally, the core set comes with a scenario booklet, another bug hunt. I'm not going to go into detail on this for obvious reasons, but once again, very nice layout. Very compact. There's some excellent maps in there. And this is the party investigating a sort of research station where communication has been lost. And I'll say no more about that. But I've had a quick read through that. And I think, yeah, I'll definitely be putting the players through this one. There's a quick overview of the Mothership system then. I think you'll agree it looks to be very easy to get into, very quick to get up and running. And of course, having no specific setting leaves you free to develop your own, depending on if you're doing a one-shot or running a few linked scenarios or a whole campaign. So it's a blank canvas, I think. And one of the things that I read in reviews a lot was about the Warden's operation manual. And I have to say, I agree, that looks to be an outstanding resource, whether you're new to running an RPG or whether you're a little bit longer in the tooth and greyer in the beard. There's a huge amount of advice in there. I've really just skimmed the surface at the moment, but I'm going to be digging deep into that. And this, in a way, takes the place of a setting, because if you had, you know, a very specific setting, let's go back to Star Trek, then you'll get lots of information about the Star Trek lore, how things work, the Star Trek universe, etc., etc. With this, it seems to me that the tables and information they give you, even if you were just going to stick to rolling randomly for things, you'd very quickly start building up your own setting. So yeah, I think that's a very valuable resource, not just for playing Mothership, but for any RPG. And I haven't checked, but I would imagine you can buy the Warden's Operation Manual separately. If you can, then I would recommend you do. If you're running any type of RPG, I think you'll find it very, very useful. That's it for today then. As I said, next time we're going to go into a little more detail on the setting and also some tweaks that I may need to make to the rules in order to suit that setting and the campaign style. So I would be very interested to hear from any of you who have played Mothership, whether as a player or whether you've been running the game, and especially if you've run a Mothership campaign. What were the tweaks you found worked for you in order to suit your gaming style? And if you are into RPGs, do keep an eye out for some other uploads we've got coming up. I've just done one on tips for public speaking, which of course we have to do as gamers sometimes. There's going to be a follow-up to that, delving more into RPGs, how to improve our RPG and gaming communication skills. And following that, I'm also going to be putting a video up on how to create a good atmosphere for your horror RPGs. Okay, thanks again for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Keep watching the skies.